Live from the studios of Radio Shalom, 1650 AM in Montreal, Canada, the city of Joie de Vivre, the world capital of culinary variety, and the home of the Montreal Canadiens. This is the Money and Business Show with your host, Samuel Izurzer, consultant with TE Mirador, a national wealth management company answering to all your financial planning needs since 1972, known as TE Wealth in the rest of the country and headquartered in Toronto. Every week, Samuel and his guests discuss money, investments, financial services, and the world economy. Over the next hour, you can have your questions about business and personal finances answered. So call 514-738-4100 extension 200 to speak with Samuel and his guests. And now, here is the host of the Money and Business Show, Samuel Izurzer.
Money, and Mexico's war on drugs. We've all heard about Mexico's war on drugs, a fight between rival drug cartels and government forces. Ciudad Juarez remains Mexico's murder capital across the border in El Paso. It also is very dangerous. It's a war in which the new president can't claim victory yet, can't pull out, and which only gets worse. Mexico's drug war could become its Iraq. So, is it really this bad? Yes, and it's coming closer to home sooner than you think. The drug mafia cartel is one of the most dangerous and evil in our societies because it is more organized and patronized than the terror perpetrated by the evil fanatics, terrorist extremists in the Middle East. These mafias, with the support of the rich and powerful elements of the societies, are bloody ruthless in wiping out any opposition to their wicked activities, which mostly revolve around money for crime. The best way to deal with them is to strike them where it hurts the most, which is to wipe out their drug distribution points, mostly operated controlled by the small cartels. In Mexico, to attack and destroy the small cartel is well undertaken by the Mexican army, yet it lacks proper intelligence network and coordination. So, should the Mexican government continue to fight the war on drugs and the cartels, or should the focus be on tackling its causes like unemployment, lack of education, and corruption? How is this affecting the day-by-day life in Mexico? And is the violence just restricted to northern Mexico? And within the last year, there has been a sharp increase in drug-related violence across the U.S., and the war on the Mexican drug cartels reaches catastrophic levels of violence across the border. Some border towns on the Mexican side have turned into literally war zones, with the Mexican police fighting for control with the drug lords armed with military-grade weaponry. So will the violence spread to the borders of the United States and eventually Canada? And will the drug cartels one day be using fear, cohesion, and torture to try to intimidate American politicians, citizens, police, and the governments into backing down? And will we see more extortion, kidnapping, beheading, assassination, and mass killing on the streets of the United States as the new bullies are in town? They do not fit at all. The question we should be all asking is it too late? As the Mexican cartel setting up shop across the USA? Or have the crackdown in Mexico and increased border enforcement have impacted the Mexican drug cartel business in North America? Today, live from an undisclosed location and is on assignment, is Mr. Jerry Brewer, is a former CIA officer in the Counterterrorism Center who has served the U.S. government as a counterterrorism specialist, practitioner, and senior trainer with the extensive operational activities in Latin America and the Middle East as an intelligence community operative. He will discuss with us about who are these thugs in Mexico and how the violence is spilling in the United States and how it's affecting legitimate businesses in Mexico and in North America. My name is Samuel Izurzer, your host of the Money and Business Show on Radio Shalom, CJRS, 1650 AM. Thank you for tuning in into live on the Money and Business Show with our business studios headquarters in Montreal, the financial capital, and the home of the greatest hockey team. That's right, the Montreal Canadiens. We have another great show for you today, and as always, you can call if you have any questions, comments, or criticism on today's topic. Please call us directly, 514-738-4100. Extension 200. Email me at moneyandbusinessshow@gmail.com. I'll take all the emails. And if you have any inquiries, you can also visit our website at www.radioshalom.ca. All our shows are archived there. I also work as a financial consultant for TE Mirador, or TE Wealth. Has been providing corporate executive CEOs, families, employers, and employees with an independent wealth management and financial education services since 1972. You can visit our website for my contact information at www.temirador.com for financial services. Today our topic is the coming invasion of Mexico's drug war and its lucrative profits. Today I have Mr. Maurice Cousineau from National Bank Financial. How are you?
I'm doing well, Sam. How are you doing today?
Good. There's
Good.
literally a war up there. Do you know that in northern Mexico?
Doesn't seem to be getting better, but we'll soon find out.
We'll soon find out very soon. I'd love to talk more, but we also have Mr. Brian Wolofsky. How are you?
Very well, Sam. How are you today?
Thank you for coming into our studio. So right away, I want to introduce our guest. Right away. So who is he?
Okay, Sam. Our guest today is Mr. Jerry Brewer. He's a former CIA officer in the Counterterrorism Center. He has served the U.S. government as a counterterrorism specialist, practitioner, and senior trainer with extensive operational activity in Latin America and the Middle East as an intelligence community operative with fluency in Spanish. With over 30 years of professional, managerial, and leadership experience in the field of criminal justice, 15 years as chief of police in 3 states, Jerry's awards include U.S. Congressional and State Senate and House honors. He is a published author, columnist, keynote speaker, consultant, and expert witness on extensive international criminal justice topics: intelligence, terrorism, counterterrorism, transnational organized crime and drug cartels, policing, leadership, major case criminal investigations, homicides, and related world events. He's the president and CEO of Criminal Justice International Associates, a global threat mitigation firm located in Northern Virginia. Go ahead, Sam.
How are you, Jerry? How you doing?
Great, Sam. It's indeed a pleasure to be with you.
And thank you for taking some time off to talk on the Money and Biz Show at a very hot topic, of course. Jerry, you were assigned to go to Argentina to investigate the July 18th bombing of the Jewish Community Center in Argentina. Despite all the international attention, despite the investigation help from Israel and the United States, Jerry, no one has been convicted for the July 18th, 1994 bombing of the Community Center in Argentina, in which 85 people died and more than 300 were injured. Is that right?
That's correct. As a matter of fact, Argentina has been very dogmatic in their pursuit of that. Even though they have recently, under the new administration, had some leftist leanings, they were very well entrenched on trying to get to the bottom of the bombings that took place in 1992 at the Jewish embassy or at the Israeli embassy, and in 1994 at the community center there. And consequently, what they were able to do was to form a link to Hezbollah as well as Iran, and that's where it stands. It's the usual bartering and accusing and point fingering at each other, and at this point in time, nothing's has reached culmination.
How long have you been in Argentina assigned to that case?
Well, I went down there right after the Atlanta bombings. When the bombing happened at the Olympics there in Atlanta, who ultimately they arrested Richard Jewell for that and eventually let him go. Bill Clinton had originally said that he wanted to pursue all angles of any type of Middle Eastern attacks, especially on the homeland here in the United States. I ultimately was sent down to Buenos Aires. Now, one of the things I want to explain about Argentina, even though we have the tri-border area down there that is a very well-known Middle Eastern hub, there is terrorists in that area. It is a hub of crime, all sorts of crime, human trafficking, just about everything you could think of, kind of the Casablanca of the newer decade. And consequently, even with that down there, the U.S. intelligence agency somewhat took a back seat to allow the Israeli Mossad intelligence service to be the primary terrorist interdictors down there. And now since that time of those bombings, it has changed. But during the time I went down there, we were just to go down there and to assist in any way we could and develop leads on any potential terrorist activity that may have originated from the Atlanta bombings. Now, we did have information at the time that there had been a potential terrorist that had come into the Middle East and into the northeastern area of the United States, had flown in and had traveled down the corridor, and they believed through Atlanta and then on down to Miami, and then flying out to Buenos Aires. So that's what I did when I went down there. We were to essentially hook up with the Mossad group and just see what we could do.
So let's go about now to talk about Mexico. A powerful car bomb exploded outside the home of the top police official of northern Mexico border in the state of Tamaulipas early yesterday, killing 2 policemen and injuring about 4 officers and 3 civilians. Jerry, Although the drug problem has been around for many years, how and when did the situation in Mexico get way out of control?
Well, I tell you, I'm glad you asked that question. First of all, Mexican drug cartels have essentially morphed into transnational organized criminals. There are no borders anymore. This so-called drug war is now previously a war against is now primarily a war against organized crime, with barbaric murder, terrorist modus operandi. From Argentina all the way to the U.S. border with Mexico, we're experiencing that. Essentially what took place was, and the not-so-humble true beginnings of this, I mean, there's always been drug trafficking and violence in Mexico and Latin America with the drug trade, but the not-so-humble beginnings began in August of 2005. I wrote an op-ed in the Houston Chronicle in August of 2005 entitled Out-and-Out Terrorism on the Border near Nuevo Laredo, which is right across the border from Laredo, Texas. Essentially what had occurred at that time in 2005 was a firefight that occurred between rival members that revealed a large cache of paramilitary-style weapons, AK-47s, grenade launchers, a couple of bazookas, military armament, bullet-resistant vests, police uniforms, and get this, pictures of police officers, routes to their homes, addresses where their children went to school, where their wives shopped. This was classic traditional terrorist modus operandi of what we refer to as pre-attack surveillance.
Unbelievable.
It's a classic Middle Eastern terrorist type of a scenario. It's part of their attack cycle. Pre-attack surveillance is where they watch these people and surveil them diligently. And what they were doing were stalking these police officers and public officials. Now, what subsequently occurred right after that, now we're still in 2005, police chiefs began to be murdered as well as run out of town. Nearly 40 to date have been murdered in Mexico. Over 100 have been threatened. City officials, federal police, other government officials have been murdered. The initial Mexico and U.S. reaction was, no big deal, this is simply a war over drug turf. Well, I had information that U.S. Border Patrol were being routinely fired upon in what they refer to as the Tucson sector of the border near Nogales, Mexico. Border Patrol agents were being stalked in the hills by paramilitary type of insurgents that were actually using sophisticated communication devices that were monitoring what the Border Patrol agents were doing and were firing upon them. And they were using sophisticated cover and concealment techniques, very typical of specialized military type of movements. And also they had put bounties on U.S. law enforcement as well as Border Patrol agents. So that essentially occurred right during that time frame. And it wasn't until President Calderon took office in December of 2006, and this is where most people believe this is when it really started. He took office and launched a very aggressive offensive against the drug cartels, who eventually became known as narco-terrorists. But at the time, everybody was saying this is just rival turf wars. It's just cartel versus cartel. They're not hurting anybody else. I mean, they were just totally in the blind. And what we did in the United States is we failed to assess these threat scenarios. Our intelligence, human intelligence, was not there. We really didn't have much of a need to have human intelligence in terms of tradecraft type stuff down in Mexico. I mean, yes, you had the DEA type of and drug intelligence, but we weren't looking for major threats in Mexico at the time, so we thought this would go away. Well, Los Zetas, which are a paramilitary group that mostly they were conscript troops out of Mexico that had deserted the ranks. Approximately 31 or 32 of them at the time left the ranks of the Mexican military, and they were special forces type of individuals, very well trained in special tactics, as well as part of their what they refer to as their airmobile unit. They were recruited by the Gulf Cartel, which was pretty much running the Caribbean side of the Mexican homeland there, and they hired Los Zetas to be their enforcement arm, their muscle. And they didn't disappoint them. They were routinely killing rivals at random and just anybody that stepped in their way. And they eventually became so powerful that they took over. And they have since gone into Honduras and saturated Central America, and they've even been found as far south as Argentina.
Jerry, just stay on the line. Again, we have Mr. Jerry Brewer, is a former CIA officer in the Counterterrorism Center. He is the president and CEO of Criminal Justice International Associates, a global threat mitigation firm located in Northern Virginia. My name is Samuel E. Zerzer for the Money Missional Radio Shalom, CJRS 1650 AM Montreal. We'll be right back in 2 minutes.
Morris Kuzner from National Bank Financial, and we're right back at you with our special guest live today, Mr. Jerry Brewer from an undisclosed location. He is on assignment. He's a former CIA officer and counterterrorism from the Counterterrorism Center. He's served the U.S. government as a counterterrorism specialist, practitioner, and senior trainer with extensive operational activity in Latin America and the Middle East as an intelligence community operative. He is the president and CEO of Criminal Justice International Associates, a global threat mitigation firm located in Northern Virginia. Go ahead, Sam.
Yes. Jerry, again, thank you again for talking to us on today's show, especially a very hot topic, what's going on, literally a war zone going on back there in Mexico. But why did Mexico and the U.S. Begin early denial on severity of what was happening in Mexico in 2005 and even years later?
That's a good question, but as I stated earlier, the U.S., from the U.S. standpoint, they just failed to properly assess the threat level. They weren't looking at it. Our diplomatic type of people, our diplomatic types, as I refer to them, down in Latin America, have been somewhat dormant over the past years prior to that. There wasn't a lot of activity going on. We were concerned about the Iraq War and other areas, so there was little attention given to Latin America. So we essentially missed some of those indicators, the so-called handwriting on the wall that was occurring down there. But Mexico, they totally had no idea what they were up against. They had no policing institutions capable of doing that. And let me say this from the outset: there's not any police in the United States, Canada, Mexico, or anywhere in the world that were ever designed or created to face this type of military-like armament and sophisticated espionage like tradecraft that some of these people use down there. They were fighting basically an insurgent, and that's why I call them transnational organized criminals. That's a title that I like to use, because these people know no borders, and they're sophistically trained in all types of paramilitary type of tactical type of warfare, and their bombings are becoming commonplace down in Mexico. The beheadings, the torture, the kidnapping are reminiscent of classic Middle Eastern terrorism. A lot of people that debate the word terrorism, they're first to tell you, well, it must follow ideological or religious beliefs. That's not true. You know, whatever puts fear in the hearts of people when people are being murdered and people think that only the cartel members are being murdered, that's not true. Many, many innocents are dying, not to mention the direct confrontations, the deliberate ambushes by the Zetas and other gangs that deliberately ambush the military and the police down there. This is about power. This is about control, influencing the government. Even President Calderon, later into 2007, admitted they were near a failed state.
So, Jerry, just tell us the dollar amount of the magnitude of this massive drug trade.
Well, let's start with the main problem. The number one source country destination for drug use is the United States. We consume roughly about 80% of the world's cocaine. We're spending right at estimates between $55 and $60 billion a year on drug use. That's part of the problem. We're the demand, and the suppliers originate in Peru and Bolivia and Colombia, and then it's facilitated by some unscrupulous governments such as Venezuela, and filters its way into Central America, where about 90% of the drugs enter the country is through the Mexican border.
Jerry, it's Brian Wolofsky here. I have two really quick questions and then the big one. Any correlation between the gangs and the current disputed election in Mexico?
Well, there was intelligence information that they were trying to influence those elections. They've done that in the past. This new party that this new president-elect, Peña Nieto, that was just elected. He's from the PRI party. They ruled from 1929 to 2000, and they've been known as a very highly corrupt party over the years. We're hoping that this president-elect Nieto will be someone that's different, but the primary concern is that it's gone, as I said, the drug trade in Mexico, and all of that being the hub of essentially the delivery point into the United States. It's gone through so many corrupt hands. When Calderon first made some initial arrests in his own government, he arrested the chief of the organized crime unit, the head of the Mexican organized crime federal police position, as well as a Mexican Interpol official was arrested. I mean, at the highest levels there was corruption. The Calderon purged over, I forget how many, I think it was over 200 and something police officials he purged out of the 31 Mexican states because of the corruption. There was so much corruption that essentially they had no one to trust but the military, and had no choice but to use the military to interdict, and it was the only thing they could do.
Are these guys more dangerous than the Medellins were? I mean, now that the Ochoas and Pablo Escobar are dead, are these guys the preeminent danger out there as opposed to the Medellins and the Colombians?
Well, certainly these are paramilitary trained people. Los Zetas are essentially an army. And but it's not just them anymore. So many of the splinter organizations, about 22 to 25 major drug kingpins were taken down, which disrupted a lot of the other cartels that were out there. And a lot of them splintered, and they became smaller factions. Some of them morphed into traditional crime of robbery and other types of criminal activity, and some local drug trade. But Los Zetas essentially had the upper hand based upon their armament and their threat level of hanging people from bridges, and dismembering them and cutting their heads off, and they're again using these weapons of that they could hold off an army. In fact, in Syria, they would do well to be able to have the type of weaponry that Los Zetas have.
Morris Kuzno here. I got a question for you. You were mentioning before that the only ones they can trust is the military, and I've read a lot about that the police can't be trusted. A retired general or a high-placed military person was put in charge of the police in Cancun about a year and a half ago, and they had him executed. And I know Mexico wasn't paying too much attention then because the drug problem was basically along the corridor and along the U.S. border. But now there's talk that it's starting to hit the Cancun and the Mayan Riviera. Is that true? And they're scared that that could affect the tourist business.
Well, it is. It's been going on. It's been going on for a long time. It's just been lesser played out. You don't get a lot of the media attention. There again, that's Mexico. Mexico has done as much as they can to keep the media from... and I'm not saying they were doing anything deliberate against the media. Let's face it, there have been, I think, over 50 or 60 media people killed. And I'm not pointing a finger at anybody, but media people have been silenced all over Mexico. And the 70% of the drugs come around the Pacific side of Mexico anyway. They're on that side there. Those are primarily loading and offloading locations too, for land routes to bring the drugs back across. But on both sides of Mexico, on the waterways, the Gulf Cartel had the east side, and it's just been a smorgasbord of people just out for themselves, and where they met resistance, whether it be official, police, government resistance, they killed them or tortured them, or if it was media interfering with them, they were murdered. They're ruthless, they're barbaric, and as I said, they use the typical Middle Eastern methods of terror, the beheadings and the torture and things like that to coerce people and to let them know, to make a statement that they are the power there.
Jerry, we have about a few minutes left for the half, but most North Americans don't realize it, but Mexico is a major player in global oil production. According to the Energy Information Agency, it was the 7th largest oil-producing country in 2008. Mexico is the U.S. 2nd largest source of imported oil behind Canada. Oil and gas is the biggest official slice of the Mexican economy, as most people probably don't know, but oil is running out in Mexico's legendary Cantarell field, discovered in 1976. Imagine oil running out in the next, let's say, 10 years. The government may not have a choice but to turn a blind eye on the drug trafficking. Could that be true?
Well, that's the things we're worried about now. The new president-elect Peña Nieto, he said several things that he's wanting to do, and everybody's watching him very closely. He's talking about double spending on security. Well, we're already quadruple spending on security. You know, our U.S. is down there, our intelligence community is down there, military is down there training these people. He also said that he wanted to pursue money laundering. That's tremendous. That's one of the things, you know, following the money. I mean, you can't. That's what it's all about, the profit. So they do need to pursue the money laundering, and they're going to need to reduce the local crime rates. That's one of the things that Pedro Nieto said. But the issue with the government there is that there's just not a lot they can do. They've got to build policing infrastructure there like they've never had before. They essentially need to put together organizations that can take street by street, you know, take back their country street by street, state by state. They've got to deal with low wages and recruiting these law enforcement officers properly, training them in combating a transnational type of insurgent. These are very difficult tasks, and it's rather bleak to think they can do that. Now, Nieto's talking about expanding the federal police force, and that's very important. I think they have 35,000 people now. They're going to need to expand the federal police force. They're certainly more qualified and more trained, but you've got extensive investigations that need to be conducted, quality investigations, prosecutions that result in conviction with extended incarceration, technical crime scenes that need to be processed. They are just now starting to do that, and it's going to take a while. So the future is somewhat dim right now, and it's going to require a lot of intestinal fortitude, but I don't see the violence curtailing.
I don't see it either, Jerry. But look, stay on the line. We have a lot more questions to ask you. Today we have Mr. Jerry Brewer, a former CIA officer in the Counterterrorism Center. He is the president and CEO of Criminal Justice International Associates, a global threat to mitigation firm located in Northern Virginia. Today's topic is the coming invasion of the Mexico drug war and its lucrative profits. My name is Samuel Izerza for the Money and Business Show on Radio Shalom, CJRS 1650 AM Montreal. We'll be right back in 2 minutes.
From National Bank Financial, and we're into the last half hour of show. Today, live from an undisclosed location and on assignment is Mr. Jerry Brewer. He's a former CIA officer and counterterrorism from the Counterterrorism Center. He's served the U.S. government as a counterterrorism specialist, practitioner, and senior trainer with extensive operational activity in Latin America and in the Middle East as an intelligence community operative. He is also president and CEO of Criminal Justice International Associates, a global threat mitigation firm located in Northern Virginia. And later on the show, we will have Zev Spiro, Technical Take. Zev Spiro is the CEO and Chief Market Technician of Orips Research, LLC, an independent, technically driven equity research firm based in New York City. And today's topic is the coming invasion of Mexican drug war and the lucrative profits. Go ahead, Sam.
Yes, thank you again. If you have any questions, actually, you can give a call. We have an open line here, 514-738-4100, extension 200. If you have any questions concerning what's happening with the drug war in northern Mexico. Jerry, I think Mexico's drug war has been out of control for some time now, Jerry. Some agreed to legalize some drugs, and the laws that apply to alcohol would also apply to marijuana, of course. Like surgeon, pilots, bus drivers have to submit to routine drug and alcohol testing. So I don't see how that would be any different. Even though alcohol is legal, it's not legal to drink while on the job, right? And the same for marijuana. Mexico's problem has been allowed to fester for so long. I don't see how they're going to get out of it, you know, like you mentioned before. But what about those, as well as some of the Latin American governments that are talking about drug legalization?
Well, let me start with the countries that are talking about drug legalization. And a lot of that is frustration. A lot of that is the fact that they do not have, nor do they expect to have, the resources or the institutions of effective law enforcement to combat it. But at the same time, they have lawlessness. They have violations, just totally ignorance of the rule of law. This is what Mexico has. It's a power struggle. These are things that legalizing drugs is not going to add one iota to reducing violence in that country because, number one, it's not all about the drug trade anymore. There again, it's about power and control, influencing elections. Even President Calderon said these people are trying to take over the state, and they're involved extensely in kidnapping and extortion, ransom, human and sex trafficking. They're routinely killing, mass murdering migrant workers, stealing their money, extorting money from them, robbery, oil theft. They're involved in all types of organized crime. Legalizing drugs will add nothing to the stopping of the violence, and that's the most critical thing. But the other thing that most of us that have served in law enforcement as well as in intelligence is that we're concerned about the addiction levels. I mean, we are the major source of the drug demand in the world. We have prescription drug addiction now that's jumped 500% since 1980. We have drug overdoses that have risen 40% since 1980. Alaska in 1975 tried legalizing drugs. Excuse me.
Yeah, that's okay. You want to get some water there, Jerry?
No, I'm good.
Okay, go ahead.
In 1990, after trying this, they voted to recriminalize it due to the high nature of addiction from 12-year-olds and up. The Netherlands, the same thing. They had a 50% increase in youth drug use. Switzerland. Also, they were experiencing rapid neighborhood decline due to extensive drug use. So addiction is not the answer. And people try to make the argument about, well, what about alcohol? Well, anything addictive like that is something that's bad. But addiction breeds violence. And let's face it, if you legalize drugs, they still have to purchase drugs. And some of them that aren't in a position that have jobs that can routinely finance their addiction, they're going to rob you. They're going to kill you. They're going to kidnap you. They're going to steal your car and sell it. So I've never, ever been for legalization. And if we're talking about specifically about what it would do to the Mexican drug trade and the violence, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever. And it's important that we ask ourselves, is it worth it to us as a nation with our drug addiction to allow this to happen?
All right, so it's Brian here. That leads to the obvious question, which is, so how do we stop this? How do we take down the Mexican violent gangs?
Well,
is there an answer?
Well, there is an answer, and it can be complex, and I can shorten it, but not that it's an easy thing to do. I mean, I've told you about the fact that no policing organizations were ever created to face this type of monster. I mean, this is a war. What we're doing finally down there in terms of our support for Mexico, and let's face it, we're down into Honduras and Central America and the Northern Cone down there, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua, all those areas, because it's an insurgency, and we're using what we should have been using a long time ago, using our military, our Coast Guard, using signal intelligence. We're using we're eavesdropping, on electronics. That's how we're tracking down these kingpins, like we did in the Middle East. I mean, they pick up the wrong phone or get near the wrong signal, and they get a drone in their face. And we're starting to do that. Our Navy and Coast Guard are patrolling those coasts. They're making record numbers of seizures. For a while, we forced all that interdiction, forced the trafficking back into the Caribbean, and then we started hitting Puerto Rico. The FBI and DEA hit Puerto Rico very hard. They've essentially, and you can never say they shut it down, but in essence you can say they shut down the primary trafficking routes down there. So they bounce around. Canada is an excellent location now and an alternative for that. And but the drugs keep coming, but as I said, we're having to fight it as if this was a military, an actual country of insurgery attacking. We'd be fighting it as a war, and in essence, that's what's happening now. Guatemala and Honduras, especially, they're fighting these people in warlike conditions.
It's Morris Kozner here, Jerry. I've got a question for you. A couple last year, 2 years ago, I was talking to someone who was a small business owner in Monterey. And Monterey is about the size of Montreal. And, well, I won't mention what business he does, but he also, like you, mentions that the future looks dim. He's in his mid-50s. He grew up in that area, and he's seen his town deteriorate. He's even been approached by people who were saying, you know, a suitcase of money, saying, we know where your family is, this is what your wife does, and everything like that. He's even tempted to sell his business and move to the States. There was another story about a dentist who was made to pay protection in Cancun. He sold his business, moved to the States, and even wrote a book of how it's developing there. Now, they both mentioned something in common, that drugs trafficking in Mexico developed when the Colombian problem was taken care of. They weren't allowed to come in through Florida, Miami, and all that. So then Mexico, which was a route before, they said, well, why should we just be a route? And they developed it. And I know in the past, Calderon has mentioned, he says, well, why don't we address the consumption problem? You mentioned before 80% is in the U.S., and you just mentioned that. Now, is there something that could be done this way, like to try and address it? I mean, it's amazing. Okay, I'm not saying Canada is a country of angels. There are drug users here, but when I go down to the States and I'm talking to Americans down there, it seems to be more common use. Parties where there's drugs on the tables. I mean, you won't see that here at the regular average party, but you do there. Is there something that could be done on that aspect?
Well, you know, President-elect Nieto had the right idea also when he recently announced that he wants to bring on a former official from the Colombian government, Oscar Naranjo. He was instrumental in the days of the Cali and the Escobars, Cali cartel and the Escobars and all of those people, the Fabio Ochoa people, all of the kingpins in Colombia in those days, including the FARC guerrillas. They're going to bring him down for some of his expertise and ingenuity, and there again our tactical type of people are down, our intelligence people are down there, so they're putting together good models for this. But as I said before, the failed institutions of law enforcement right on through the Central America and right up into Mexico has been something that's going to have to be corrected, and it must be, because they've got to value human life. They have lost in Mexico over 50,000 people due to this problem. I mean, let's face it, we lost 58,000 troops in Vietnam, and they've lost 50,000 people in their homeland for this type of thing. It's a war. It's a monumental task. It requires much more than policemen patrolling a beat, but somebody needs to do that. They have to build a reliable, a better sourced police infrastructure for their 31 states, street by street. They've got to value human life. Human life is not respected at all with the carnage down there, and I've seen some of the most horrible things you can imagine that with what they do to people. And I mean, they'll kill their rival drug lords or their drug people, but they're also killing innocents.
Jerry, this is Sam. 20% of Canada-U.S. trade, more than about $113 billion per year, crosses the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel or the Ambassador Bridge, as we all know it. Jerry, it seems that some of the drugs stay in the Windsor, but a lot makes it across the 401 corridor to Toronto or Montreal via trucks across every day. I thought by 9/11 things could be a little bit harder to get through.
Well, you would think that, Sam, but as I said, we have that tremendous drug demand in the United States, and that has to get through. The money has to get through, and the money has to get out of the country. The money's got to go right back across that Mexican border or out in the Pacific or into the Caribbean or out through Canada. That money must move, or people are going to die. Canada, unfortunately, and when you speak about Detroit, I'm sure you're aware of the current homicide rates that they're setting far, like 3 times higher than New York City's homicide rates. That's drug war. That's gang activity. That's not necessarily Mexican and transnational gang members, but it could be in terms of turf wars in our own country, because the Mexican gangs, cartels, narco-terrorists, however you want to identify them, they're in 230, at least 230 U.S. cities, and they've been here for years. And but Detroit is exploding in homicide rates right now in gangs. And one of the things that Canada has to be concerned about now is that they're now, you all are now a major source for a source country for indoor-grown high-potency marijuana, known as BC Bud, as in British Columbia. There's a heavy influx of American and Canadian biker gangs involved in this. To give you an example, the marijuana prices in the United States from coast to coast range from $400 a pound to $2,000 a pound. But this BC Canadian bud, high potency, is 15 to 25% THC, and it's sold for between $5,000 and $8,000 a pound, and it's in demand. So, unfortunately, the demand for these drugs are playing right into the hands of these suppliers that are taking over their homeland.
Could Jerry stay on the line? Again, my name is Samuel Lizerza from the Money and Business Show, Radio Shalom, CJRS 1650 AM in Montreal. I have Mr. Jerry Brewer, a former CIA officer in the Counterterrorism Center. Again, we'll be right back in 2 minutes.
1650 AM, Radio Shalom Montreal, engages its listeners in conversation. We cover local and international issues as they affect the Jewish community. Our talk shows and live call-in programs feature controversial guests and newsmakers. Call Radio Shalom. Let your voice be heard.
We're back live in studio with Samuel Azuzer in the business headquarters of Radio Shalom 1650 AM in Montreal, Canada, with the Money and Business Show. Samuel Azuzer is a consultant with TE Mirador, which has been providing individuals, families, businesses, and employees with truly objective financial advice and education since 1972. You can visit them at www.temirador.com. You have questions about your personal finances? You need advice in making sound financial decisions? Samuel and his guests are ready to take your call at 514-738-4100 extension 200. And now, back to the Money and Business Show.
Morris Kuzma from National Bank Financial. We're into the clubhouse turn and headed down the home stretch for our show. And today, live from an undisclosed location and on assignment is Mr. Jerry Brewer. He's a former CIA officer and Counterterrorism Center. He has served the U.S. government as a counterterrorism specialist, practitioner, and senior trainer with extensive operational activity in Latin America, the Middle East, as an intelligent community operative. He is the president and CEO of Criminal Justice International Associates, a global threat mitigation firm located in Northern Virginia. Go ahead, Sam.
Jerry, we have about 1 or 2 minutes before our next guest, but what does the new election in Mexico mean to the future of this hemisphere under the new president-elect Peña Nieto?
Well, I want to believe it's a fresh start, and I certainly have high hopes for that. I know the United States, they have a lot invested in this. They can't afford for someone to step in and to be corrupt. I don't believe that Nieto is. I believe he's sincere. But Calderon has been a very aggressive Mexican president. They're going to feel his loss. A lot of them just wanted the military to not be involved in that fracas down there, and some of them were calling for legalization, thinking that would stop the violence. But Calderon stayed the course. He was valiant. He went up against them head to head, and he's made a dent. We're down there helping, and we have to hope that he will be successful.
We just hope so. It's just, I want to really thank you for shedding light to a lot of information here, Jerry. Jerry Brewer, former CIA officer in the Counterterrorism Center. Thank you very much for coming on our show. I hope you're going to come back again one of these days.
I would love to. Sam, it was a pleasure speaking to you, and
right.
I'm always willing to talk about that problem because it's going to be there for a while, and we need to stay on top of it, and I do. I write extensively about it, and do a lot of work to make sure I monitor everything that's going on down there and try to be effective where I can.
And it sounds like like here we're in Canada, but you know what? I'm actually a little bit worried what's going on south of the border because it could easily come up in the next 5 to 10 years here in Canada, and it'll be a lose-lose situation, right?
Well, it will, and you're going to need to be very cognizant of the Pacific Northwest of Canada right now, Vancouver, British Columbia, those areas. You're going to need to watch those areas very closely on the Canadian side. But the U.S., I'm sure, is looking forward to being an active part in helping both countries, Mexico and Canada, to monitor their borders and to stop this insurgency.
Good. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you very much.
Keep up the good work, Jerry.
Yeah. Thank you.
Again, thank you so much for having me.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jerry.